week 5 of our Traveling Mercies series, and you have been watching some interviews with kids, and up next, you're going to get to see a little bit of some traveling bloopers. I'm sure you'll be able to relate to that. Enjoy.
Oh, yes. I get a bedtime snack.
Ooh, nice.
Oh, sorry, I know. Excuse me. Sometimes, there's, video games, and there's games, and we don't play games. And sometimes we play video games because there's no... We're addicted. Apple's addicted. A video game. That hurt me.
Jeff, make sure you're talking a little bit louder, okay?
Okay! A balloon fight. Water fight with balloons and squirt guns.
What's your favorite vacation that you've ever been on ever?
Chocolate milk. Hershey bar. Roller coaster. Cheeseburger. I'm out of here.
You're out of here.
Oh, Tori, that was funny. Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Kevin. I'm the campus pastor here at the Westminster campus at Crossroads. So glad that you're here. As I watched that, first off, glad they didn't interview my kids. Who knows what they would say. But I also think about my experiences with my kids going on road trips with them. And I love road trips with my kids. It's one of my favorite things to do, except for that moment, and you guys know what I'm going to say. Usually it's like 5 minutes into like a 10-hour trip where they're like, "Are we there yet?" And I'm like, "No, we just started. How are you asking me this already?" So just to give you a little window into Kevin's crazy family road trips, this is what we do whenever I get that question early in a trip. I say, "Listen, you guys are not allowed to ask that question again until halfway through. We're going to do something, and you're going to know that we're halfway there, okay?" And so this is what I do. I get out and I turn on Bon Jovi as we're driving. At the moment that we get halfway there, and I assign different roles. You're going to play guitar, you're going to be drums, you're going to be bass, you've got the electric guitar solo, and we sing as loud as we possibly can the moment that we hit that midway point of the trip. Whoa, that was pretty good, actually, pretty good. Halfway there, right? Now, when it comes to the series, we're in the series called Traveling Mercies. We're in week 5. We're actually more than halfway there and through this series already. And this series has been this kind of picture of Jesus and the disciples as they've gone on a road trip together on their way to Jerusalem together. And what we've said is we've taken this road trip with Jesus and the disciples is that it's pretty clear as we go on this trip with Jesus that it's not just about the destination. It's not just about getting to where they need to go. Jesus is using this opportunity, and there's this sense that it's about the journey as much as it is about the destination. And that's true for us as we follow after Jesus as well, isn't it? It's not just about some destination we're trying to get to. It's about the journey that we're on. It's about the process we're on. It's about what Jesus is teaching us on the way. And so today we're going to learn about greatness. We're going to talk about what greatness is all about. We're going to unpack what Jesus says about greatness. And in our culture, one of the places that we hear us talk about greatness a lot is actually in the area of sports, right? And so if you're a sports fan, you might have heard the phrase, the GOAT, which is not the animal. If you listen to a lot of ESPN, you probably know that the GOAT refers to the greatest of all time. And so if you're having a conversation, who's the greatest of all time, you say, who's the GOAT, right? And so right now, one of the big conversations that's happening is between LeBron James and Michael Jordan. Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Maybe you have an opinion on that. Last service, it was pretty clear. Michael Jordan seemed to get the vote there. But then in football is the same conversation. Now, here at Crossroads, we've got all different people, different kind of teams that they root for. We've got people that are Redskins fans. We've got people that are Ravens fans. We even got some Steelers fans. And most of the time, we don't agree with each other. Let's be real about that. But there's one thing that we can all agree on, that Tom Brady should not be considered the greatest football player of all time, right? Yep. But he's like 82 years old, and he's still throwing touchdowns. So it's kind of, it's hard to stomach, but there's actually a lot of talk. Tom Brady, is he the GOAT? Is he the greatest football player of all time? But I want to talk about Tom Brady today. I want to talk about greatness today. And I want to shift the way that we think about and we define greatness, because I think we all have an idea of what greatness is. And here's the big idea that I want to get across today is that if you don't define greatness the right way, you're going to end up chasing the wrong thing. Let me say that again, because that's really important. That's what we're talking about today. If you don't define greatness the right way, you're going to go about your life and you're going to chase after the wrong thing. And so we're going to unpack that idea as we go through Mark chapter 10. And as we walk through this encounter between the disciples and Jesus, we're going to find three things that I want to look at. The first one is we're going to talk about what everyone wants, The second thing we're going to talk about is what no one wants. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is what Jesus wants. What everyone wants, what no one wants, and what Jesus wants as we look at this encounter in Mark 10. Now, if you have your Bibles, you could open them up to Mark chapter 10, or if you have your phones, you want to get out the Bible app, or even if you don't have the Bible app, you can just Google Mark chapter 10. It'll come right up. Or if you're too lazy to do any of that, we're going to have the verse on the screen as well. You could do that. So we're going to turn to Mark 10. And as you do that, a little background on the Gospel of Mark. Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, wasn't a disciple, but he knew Peter. And all of Mark's content, we believe, came from his conversations, interactions with Peter, who was a disciple and was an eyewitness account of all that happened in the life of Jesus. And so here we are in Mark 10, and there's this exchange that happens right before the passage that we're going to look at, where Jesus tries to prepare his disciples for what's coming. And he tries to kind of give them a picture of what's going to happen. He's like, listen, things are going to shift, things are going to change. And Jesus gets pretty graphic and clear about what's going to happen to him. He kind of calls them together and huddles them up, and he says, listen, guys, I'm about to be betrayed. As we go into Jerusalem, I'm going to be beaten. I'm going to be tortured. I'm going to be condemned to death. Guys, they're going to crucify me. I need you to know that. And so you can imagine there's kind of this tender moment where Jesus is sharing what's about to happen and trying to prepare his disciples. And that's kind of what we step into. That's the background of the passage that we start with here in verse 35. And it starts with this. Then, meaning, let me pause right here before we even get in. Then meaning like the very next thing. Like right after Jesus did that whole thing, the disciples were like, hey, Jesus, sorry about the whole like you're going to get beat up and spit on and tortured thing, but Jesus, I kind of have this little favor I was hoping I could ask you. Is that okay? And so that's kind of what we get into right afterwards. This is verse 35. Then, meaning right after that exchange, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. That's a great way to start a conversation, isn't it? What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. And they replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other on your left in your glory. Let me pause right here, because an alternate title for this message could be, don't be that guy. Because James and John are that guy right here. This is amazing. Jesus just tells them what's going to happen to him, but these guys are clearly completely clueless, because Jesus just got telling them again and again and again, listen, I'm not going to be like other kings. I got a different kind of kingdom. I've got a different kind of thing that's going to happen here. But then, right after Jesus is done explaining that to them, the disciples come up to Jesus and they're like, so Jesus, we were hoping that you could do a little favor for us, if that was okay. Like, when you're king, and we're past all that stuff that you talked about, like, I know we can't be king, because you kind of got the king thing on lockdown, but if you're up there, Jesus, could we be like, right there? Could we be like, your right-hand guy, your left-hand guy? Like, when you get the penthouse office, could I just get the corner office right over here on the side? Can we work that out, God? Like, could you hook that up for me? And so they're trying to convince Jesus to agree to this. Now, if you have kids, you've experienced this, and you kind of know what I'm talking about, because you've had this moment probably where your kids come up and they say, Mom, Dad, and they say, I have something that I want, but I'm going to ask you something, but you have to say yes. And you're like, No, I'm not gonna. What are you talking about? And for dads in the room with daughters, you know that this is even harder because somewhere at like age 2, I don't know how it happens, but daughters figure out that if they give their dads just like a certain look and a certain smile, like the right eyes or whatever, that they can get almost anything that they want, right? And so that's really hard. But James and John, that's kind of what they're trying to do here with Jesus. They're trying to butter him up and they're trying to soften him up. And they say, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Now, before you get too judgy and you kind of look at the disciples and you feel holier than thou, let me ask, don't we all do this? Don't we all do this, right? Like, if the first point that we're talking about is what everyone wants, it's this. We all want God to do whatever we want him to do for us, right? That sounds good. We all kind of feel like that'd be great if we could just ask God and he would do it for us. We all come to God with this kind of posture. If we're really honest, oftentimes we come to God and we say, you know what, God, thanks for everything that you've done for me. Really appreciate it, but I've got this list that I'm hoping that we can work out here because I got some stuff that I have been needing in my life. Now, pretty clear, the disciples, their request is confused. They had terrible timing. That wasn't great on their part. But underneath it, I think, is a desire that we all can identify with. Yeah, we want God to do for us. Yeah, we all want that, and if we're to be honest, that's something we all struggle with at times. But there's something else here, and I think we all desire to be great in our lives. Like, it's right under the surface of almost all of our lives. Maybe you don't even really think about it, but none of us gets up in the morning and thinks to themselves, wow, I just really want to be mediocre today. That's really what I was hoping for. If I could just get to mediocre, that would be really great. And so we all desire to be great at some level of our lives, in some area of our lives. But I've had Christians sincerely ask me, is it okay to be Christian and desire to be great? Like, is Jesus anti-greatness? Is he against me trying to be great? Is it okay that I want to do great things with my life? And it's almost like we have this idea, this concept, that we have a choice to make. Either we're going to be a humble servant of Jesus, or we can do great things in our lives. Well, we can't have it both ways. And let me just clear this up right here, because this is super important. I don't want anyone to be confused about this. Jesus is not anti-greatness, okay? Jesus isn't against ambition or drive. He's not telling you that you shouldn't be a leader. Jesus isn't saying that you shouldn't try to do big things with your life. In fact, I want to just say and celebrate the fact that there's all kinds of people at Crossroads doing all kinds of great things in all different kinds of areas of culture and society. We've got teachers, we've got business owners, some of the Carol's best businesses. We've got plumbers, electricians, we've got physicians, we've got dentists, we've got military people, we've got psychiatrists, scientists, we've got realtors. And all of these folks, so many others, are innovators and they're leaders in our area here. And so often, I just want to say, I want to celebrate the fact that they've got a drive, they've got a desire to be great, and that God is doing that in their lives. And so I'm here to tell you this, is that one thing everyone wants is to be great. And that's actually okay. Jesus is not anti-greatness. But Jesus knows that if we don't define greatness the right way, that we're going to end up pursuing the wrong things. That's what he's trying to tell us. And so often, if we're to be really honest, we don't define greatness the right way. And what we end up doing is we end up defining greatness as fame, as intelligence, as influence. We define it as our abilities, or we define it as our achievements or our success. We might define greatness as wealth or security, or we might define it as beauty. And Jesus is not saying that greatness is bad, but he's trying to define greatness differently. And what he does is he turns our definition, our understanding of greatness upside down, and he shifts our priorities and our perspective. So that leads me to the second thing that I want to unpack here. The disciples talked about what everyone wants. Jesus is going to talk about what no one wants, right? And so that's what we're going to look at here in verse 38. This is Jesus' response to the disciples' kind of misguided request. He says this, Jesus called them together. Verse 38. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink, and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right hand or my left hand is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard this, the other disciples, they became indignant with James and John. So Jesus' response here is really amazing, because if I were to be really honest, if the disciples said this to me, my response would have been more like, really, guys, the right and the left hand, after I talked about that I was going to have to go and be beaten, that's the best you've got, is like, can I sit at your right and left? Can I get some new disciples here? Can we hit the reset button? Because these guys are totally missing it. We've got to be able to find 12 guys better than this, right? But that's not what Jesus does. Instead, Jesus responds with grace, and he asks this question back to them. He says, "Are you able to drink the cup?" Now, when Jesus says this, when he talks about the cup, this reference would have brought up all kinds of images for the disciples at that time. Like the cup at that time, if you sat at the king's table, you would get a cup, and that cup was your portion. But it's also, in the Old Testament, the cup, it was connected to this imagery of judgment, retribution, and wrath. But even more than any of those things, I think what Jesus, when he talks about the cup, what he was really talking about was his sacrifice on the cross. That's the cup that he was going to have to drink for us. But the disciples completely miss this. And so Jesus looks into the disciples' eyes and he says, "You don't understand what you're asking." See, the disciples were thinking about the moment where Jesus was going to be glorified on a throne, and they wanted to sit to his right and to his left in that moment when he was king on a throne. But Jesus was thinking about the moment where he was going to be glorified on a cross, and to his right and to his left were going to be common criminals on either side of him. So you don't understand what you're asking. The disciples, they came with this presumption, they came with this expectation, they came with a sense of entitlement. And I just so wish that I could tell you that I never did that in my walk with Jesus, but I do. And maybe you do too. Like I wonder how often Jesus has to respond to me with this same level of grace and patience as I come to him, thinking that I have it all figured out, and clearly I don't. I'm completely missing it. So what does no one want? No one wants the sacrifice that comes along with true greatness. But Jesus understood that before he wore the crown, he had to bear the cross for us, right? And so we all want greatness, but no one wants the sacrifice that comes along with greatness. And Jesus here begins to unpack and unwrap the true costs of greatness. And he's saying the same thing is true for each of us. We want the outcome of greatness in our lives, but we don't like the process that's going to take to get there, right? And so it's kind of like that, it's kind of like the college student that right after they graduate from college, they start applying to jobs. They think they're going to be the CEO, like the first week, and they're like kind of really confused, because when you talk to a CEO that's leading at that level, the kinds of experiences that they needed to have, the way that they went about learning and the sacrifice that it took there, they clearly are missing it. Or it's like the moment where we look at a great athlete that's on the field, and we see what they're doing, the outcome of greatness, but we don't know the kinds of work and the kinds of time that they took in practice and in the gym. Just this week, it reminds me, I was at a concert, and I was really excited about this concert. We got there, and they were like, "Okay, you're in section 3," and so we had to go up the steps, and they were like, "Yeah, just keep walking. You're all the way up at the very top." And so we kind of got there, and they're like, just when we got up to the very top section, they're like, "Just you're way up there in the very last seat." Basically, we had the furthest seats away. I don't think you get any further away than we were. And I remember looking down at the seats down here, and I was thinking, "Hey, how come I can't have that seat down there? Like, I'm way back here. This is crazy." And then I found out what one of those seats costs. And I said, "Oh, okay, never mind. This seat is great, actually. You get like a really good perspective back here of the whole thing, right?" So listen, we all want greatness in our lives, but we're not willing to sacrifice for it. You know what? We all want the seat, but we're not willing to pay the price for that seat. But eventually the disciples would understand the cost that they were going to have to pay. In fact, I can imagine the moment where Jesus was saying to the disciples, "You will drink from the cup." In fact, that moment for Jesus, it probably was hard because I imagine Jesus knew what was coming for the disciples. He knew what they were going to have to suffer because eventually these two, James and John, do drink from the cup. If you look at church history, you're going to find that James was the first martyr in the Christian church. John also drank from the cup. He ended up being banished as an elderly man to the island of Patmos, and legend has it too that they tried to martyr him in a pot of boiling oil. But the disciples, they don't get that yet. They don't get the sacrifice that it's going to take for them yet. And so the scene actually gets even worse than that. They're so clueless and they're so disconnected that what actually happens is this scene kind of just starts to descend into them just kind of being indignant with each other and getting upset with each other. The 10 that weren't there, they heard James and John were having this conversation. They get indignant, and they weren't indignant because they thought these guys were insensitive asking Jesus for this. They were indignant because they wanted the corner office, and they were upset that they hadn't asked for it, right? And so what actually happens is it descends into this like food fight between all the disciples that are arguing about who's better and about who should have the position and about whose piece of cake is bigger than the other one's. And at this point, Jesus realizes these guys are not getting this at all. They are so confused, and he sits them down. And it's almost like a family meeting moment where he's like, all right, everyone to the living room. Sit down. We're having a talk, right? And so you can imagine Jesus' frustration at this point. I mean, he has said this again and again. How long has he been telling these guys this? But it's almost like he's saying, listen, hey, guys, we've been over this before. We're going to go through it one more time. And he gives them a sit down about leadership in the kingdom and what that should look like. And that brings us to point 3, which is what Jesus wants. This is what Jesus wants. So we talked about what everyone wants, what no one wants. Now we're going to talk about what Jesus wants. In verse 42, he says it super clearly, and it's counterintuitive, and it's countercultural, and it could change your life. It says this: Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. And said, whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all." And so Jesus kind of sits the team down, and he's trying to give them a picture. He's like, listen, guys, you know how leadership works in the world today, right? You know that there's people in authority, and those people lord their authority over other people. Like those people, they want to control people, and they want to act like they have this power, and they want everyone that's underneath them to do their pleasure and for their bidding. And the disciples are like, exactly. That's what we're talking about, Jesus. That sounds really great, actually. Isn't that what we're trying to do? Like the corner office, get control so people will serve us thing. I thought that's what we were trying to get into here. And this is so ironic because track with me for a second, because here we have the Lord of all, and he's talking about what it means to be a servant. And we've got these servants who want to be lords. And there's something wrong about this picture. There's something wrong about this scene. I mean, Jesus is the one person who has the right to lord over because he's actually, Lord, right? And yet again and again, he says, I'm going to show you a different way. And the irony of that truth is lost on the disciples here in this moment. So Jesus is like, listen, okay, hey, you guys want to be great? You want to be the boss? You want to run a department? You want to be responsible for things? That's okay. It's good that you want to be great. That's fine. But you guys have got the complete backwards idea of what greatness is all about. You have the wrong model. Now the first will be last. It's different, guys. And he completely flips their concept of greatness. Because here in the first century, there was one really obvious picture of what greatness was like, and that was the Roman Empire. And Jesus says, hey, you know those officials, those soldiers in Rome? That's not the kind of picture of greatness we're going for, guys. That's not what we're looking for. Now, when you hear Jesus talk about the officials, or maybe you hear me say it, maybe you kind of check out and you think, officials, I don't know any officials in my life. This doesn't really relate to me. But listen, I think we've all seen this in our lives. We've all experienced this in our lives. Each of us have experienced someone who's in a position of authority over us, lord it over us, right? We've all experienced that. And maybe it can be all different kinds of ways. Like maybe you knew someone and they were just starting out, and right as they were getting started, they had a humility, they were friendly to you, and then you run into them years later, and maybe they found a level of success or prestige or money, and they're in a different kind of like socioeconomic class than you or something now, right? And they just act different when they see you. And they just treat you different, and you just kind of sense it. There's something that happens. Or maybe you're single, and someone makes you feel less than because of that. Or maybe one of your friends gets promoted in a job, and as they're in this new position, they try to like pull up the ladder of success with them. We see it in politicians and CEOs. We see it in police officers and pastors. We see it all the time. People lording their authority over the people around them. And it's so easy for us to see it in other people, but it's true of you too. Here's how I know. Just think about this for a second. Come with me for a second here. Think about the last time that you ran into someone that you knew in maybe high school, or maybe you knew them in college. It's been years. Maybe it's been 5 years, 10 years, 20 plus years since you've seen this person. Maybe you run into them, you're at a barbecue, or maybe you see them at the hardware store, or maybe it's like, that random Facebook request. You're like, ooh, this person, I haven't seen them in a long time. And what happens in that moment when, in your heart, there's a snap judgment that happens. You see them now, and then you immediately think and try to remember how they used to be. And maybe you remember and you think, wow, they used to be super attractive, they used to be super smart, it seemed like they were a sure success, and then you kind of, in this moment, subconsciously, it's not like we sit there and think, I'm going to judge this person now, but we do, and we compare ourselves, and we start to look, and we think, wow, maybe they'll let themselves go a little bit, Maybe it doesn't seem like they're quite the success that I thought they would be, and it causes us to feel a certain way about ourselves. Now, come on, don't act like you've never done that before. I'm not the only one that's done that. But what happens is that usually our definition of what greatness is all about just naturally leads to the comparison game. And we kind of do this thing where, how am I comparing to the people around us? And as we do that, what naturally happens is we compare ourselves, we lord over, we look it down on the people around us as we kind of compare ourselves to them. And so Jesus is trying to say, listen, don't get into that game. I need to define greatness differently. And I hope that today we can start to unpack the tricky mathematics of the kingdom of God, because it's so counterintuitive to what we think life should be like. Because this is what we all do. We all think we want to be at the front of the line. It doesn't change when we get older. It just looks a little different than whenever we were younger, right? We all kind of clamor for and try to push our way to the front of the line. Here I am at the front of the line. But Jesus is saying there's going to be a moment in our lives where everyone is in line, and then I'm going to say, turn the other direction. And the person that was in the very back of the line is going to be in the front, and the person that was in the back is suddenly going to be in a different position. And so what does Jesus want? He wants you to understand greatness. He wants you to understand what greatness is all about, true greatness, a right definition of greatness, so that we can be oriented the right direction in our lives as we go about. And so he says this to the disciples. He's saying it to us too. He's been speaking it to me this week as well. Greatness is not based on power or prestige. It's not based on a position. It's not based on your assets. It's not based on your house size. It's not based on your 401k size or the school you went to or how athletic that you were or how smart you were or how your kids turned out. Greatness, according to Jesus, is this posture that we go through life with and we apply wherever we are. It's a posture to love and to care for and to serve the people around us no matter what situation we're in. And that's true if you're leading a company in a boardroom. It's true if you're teaching in the classroom. It's true if you're raising your kids and you're trying to get them to clean their bedroom. It's true here in the church, in this room. And so I just want to say this is that for us here, when it comes to serving at Crossroads, as we've grown, we've sent people from Westminster to Hampstead and to Eldersburg to serve at the other campuses, and we just need more and more people here at Westminster to catch this vision of what God is doing and to step into what God is calling them to and serve the people around us. Like, I think about every single week on Sundays, the ushers, the greeters, the parking team, the hospitality team, the security team. I think about the tech team in the back and so many others. These people are living this verse out every single Sunday that they come. They're showing us a picture of what true greatness looks like as they serve the people around them and they put others before themselves. And every week when I come here on Sundays, it's a reminder, it's an example, it's an inspiration for me as I look at the people serve around us. So I just want to say, hey, if you have an interest in exploring that more, maybe a couple months ago you filled out one of those cards, you still haven't been able to connect yet, I would love to just continue that conversation with you. You could fill out your Connect card, go to the Next Step Center. I'd love to talk to you about it. Maybe you just need to keep praying about it, but because, listen, whenever we really get this, when we start to truly understand what it means to follow Jesus, this is just a natural step that happens. It's a natural reaction that happens. And as the band comes out, I want to give you the last verse. This is the last verse in the passage that we read. This is verse 45. And Jesus says this, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." See, Jesus isn't saying that we shouldn't desire to be great. Jesus is trying to show us how to be great. And he doesn't do it with an argument or give us a concept or a theory. No, he does this by giving us the most compelling picture of greatness the world has ever seen. Jesus was the picture of true greatness. He was the greatest of all time. He had unlimited power. He had unlimited resources. He had the right to fame and prestige and wealth, and yet he was born humbly in a manger. He lived in complete poverty. He gave up his rights and his privileges, and he never lorded his authority over anyone as he walked this earth. He looked like a common man, and he had a common Jewish name, and eventually he died the death of a common criminal. He could have done what the disciples wanted. He could have seized power, but instead he laid it down for the service of others. See, the disciples had seen Jesus serve. They had seen him serve and heal the hopeless. They had seen him feed thousands. They had seen Jesus touch the unclean. And before it was all over, they would see Jesus kneel down and wash the grime off their feet as Jesus washed their feet. And before it was all over, they would see Jesus hung on a cross and lay down his life for them. In fact, the road that Jesus is on with the disciples leads to Jerusalem, where he's going to be beaten, he's going to be spit on, he's going to be whipped, he's going to be mocked, he's going to wear a crown of thorns. This passage, it says that Jesus is a ransom for many. When I hear that word ransom, I think like suspense movies where someone is kidnapped or captured, and the only way that they're going to be free is the ransom is paid so that they can find freedom. That's exactly what Jesus has done for you. That's what Jesus did for me. He paid the price for your freedom. He paid the price of your sins, your mistakes, your shortcomings. And in the good news is in the ultimate picture of what true greatness looks like, what true service looks like, Jesus paid the price for you. You know, listen, if you're here today and you've never trusted Jesus with your life, if you've never crossed that line of faith, and you want to explore that, you want to have a conversation about that, or even you just want to make that step today, I would love to have a conversation with you. One of our leaders could have a conversation with you after the service. Make sure you come up if you want to make that choice in your life. Because, listen, we were made for freedom. We were made to serve the people around us. We were made to pursue greatness. It's just a different definition, a different picture of what greatness is all about. And if we wake up every single morning in our lives with that perspective, it's going to profoundly alter the direction, the trajectory of our lives. Jesus, he was the only one who had the right to be Lord, to lord over anyone, and yet he never did that. He came and he served. And that's why he's the greatest. And that's why we're still talking about him. And that's why he's worth giving our lives to. Let's pray. Lord, I just think about the fact that you could have seized power and chose the throne, and yet you chose a different path. You were on a different kind of trip, a different kind of journey, and you chose the cross instead. And Lord, I know we are all faced with that same decision in our own lives every single day, and so often I get it wrong, but we want to get better, Lord. And so, Lord, we just pray that we could look a little more like you, that we could make the right choice, that we could serve instead of seize power in our lives. Lord, we just pray that that you just move in our hearts and our lives and just make us different. In Jesus' name, amen.